Welcome, my friends, to the world of HeroQuest, a place unlike any other. Have you ever looked at those incredible detailed miniatures on Reddit and thought, man, I can never do that? Well, I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can. Today we're diving deep into the exciting world of miniature painting, and I've put together the ultimate beginner-friendly guide based on some fantastic Amazon finds. This video is inspired by one of my very first subscribers, Subject Brief, who's excited about getting started painting his miniature figures. Today I've compiled all the components that I've acquired over the past few months to get started miniature painting, and I'll show you my progress from the very first miniature I painted to the very last one I did in preparations for this video. This isn't just a shopping list. It's your first step to bringing those tiny heroes and villains to life. This is the Fair Weatherman. Welcome back to the channel. Are you ready to dive into the exciting world of miniature painting? Join me as we explore essential tools and techniques to help you bring your tiny warriors and characters to life. From priming your models for that perfect base coat to adding the final intricate details, I'll share my top recommendations and pro tips to get you started on your miniature painting journey. I'm also going to point out the flaws in some of the purchases I made early on and what I've acquired to help my painting process run a little bit more smoothly. To be honest, I was really intimidated about painting my miniatures. Earlier on, if you go back in my channel, you can see that at one point I was buying spray cans that matched closely to the HeroQuest colors and just spray painting all of the factions in those colors. And in my mind, I was checking it off the box of, okay, well, at least it looks great, it's tabletop ready. And I think that was the initial vision of Milton Bradley when they released HeroQuest back in the day. But I've found as I continue to grow into this hobby, the joy of painting and the immense amount of pleasure you have in completing a miniature. And it's so much more enjoyable to paint the vintage miniatures than it is any 3D printed miniatures I've painted thus far. Knocking out one of the Skavens last night in preparation for this video, I was just overjoyed at seeing these really unique characters come to life, and I'm going to be even more overjoyed when I put them all on the table and play a round of Advanced HeroQuest. So if you're on the fence about painting, I would encourage you to just follow through the tips I'm about to show you, pick up some of these items where you feel like it might best suit your needs, and just get in there and start. I started with 3D printed miniatures because I was afraid of ruining the vintage ones, but you can always remove any paint mistakes that you make with 90% isopropyl alcohol. I have seen a lot of people use things like brake fluid. I think Miguel from Rush to Wash does that. I haven't run into any paint that needed that type of power. Isopropyl alcohol just works fine. Soak them overnight, scrub them off with a toothbrush and some warm water, and everything tends to come off pretty easily. Now, if you don't have any 3D printed miniatures, you can always head over to your local Warhammer store on the first Saturday of every month and receive the free miniature that they hand out. That's how I initially started painting, was when my son and I took a trip over there and got our first Space Marines. These are the first miniatures that we painted together, and looking back, I can see I've come a long way. First thing, before you get started, you have to protect your furniture. I've dropped super glue on my desktop and even my hardwood floors. And the last thing you want to do is ruin any nice furniture. So the first thing I purchased was a really nice crafting mat. This is a 12 by 18 double-sided sewing mat. I've used the one side for my painting, and you can see it's already getting destroyed quite a bit, but there's still a lot of life left in this thing. This other side does have a really handy chart showing you the different sizes of bases. So if you're unsure the size base that your mini might have, you can easily find that by placing it onto the chart, which does come in handy. The next thing you're going to need is any type of Tupperware bowl to fill with soap and water, and a toothbrush to scrub off any residue that's left on the miniatures from the molding process. You're also going to need a hobby knife to cut any of those mold lines and clean up the figures before you go about priming them. It's always nice to have a really nice pair of snips to cut any of those hard plastic pieces around the bases and to remove them from your sprues. I also have on hand just a nail file. And this is something I use to soften any of those mold lines down just a bit more if I can't get them with my hobby knife. So what I plan on doing is taking a couple of my minis, running them through the preparation process with you, and then demonstrating on some that I've pre-painted the phases of painting your miniatures and getting them ready for the tabletop. So I have here my warrior from Advanced HeroQuest. In my previous videos, I have shielded him up a couple different times. I really wasn't sure how I wanted the end result to look, but I ultimately landed on this really nice lion shield. And I also have one of many Skavens that I have to paint in order to complete my Advanced HeroQuest miniatures. Now, I initially thought there was about 12 of these in the box, and then I opened up my box to get them out and realized I had 16. And then after a bit of searching on Google, I realized there was supposed to be 20 of these. So I went ahead and purchased 4 more. That'll be shipped in the next week or so. I should have them, so I can complete the box set with all of the miniatures that are included in the original release. More Skaven to paint. Who can complain about that? So let's throw these inside our Tupperware and go fill it with soap and water. All right, I just used a basic dish soap from the kitchen. Now these are 30 plus years old miniatures. They're not gonna have that residue from the mold release, but it is always a good idea just to give them a little scrub to remove any oils from your fingers so the primer will stick. Just use a light brushing motion, circular. Don't press too hard so you don't damage the mini. All right, let's go give these a rinse. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is just go over them with my hobby knife, now that it's all cleaned up and I can see what I'm working with. And just remove any of those unsightly mold lines. There's one right here I see. And try to soften a little bit. And just give the mini a once over. I'm pretty bad at doing this. Quite honestly, I always forget to do it sometimes unless there's something really glaring that needs to be removed. But any work that you do in the preparation phase will make it easier when you get to the paint. It is best if you haven't attached the shields to paint them separately and then glue them on once the model's been painted. But in preparation, I did paint one that had the shield already on, and it really wasn't that big of a deal. You don't need to go in there and paint the spots that you can't see all that well, so I wouldn't worry too much about the hand. It'll still be all right. The next step is just to get your models ready to be primed. I have a wad of sticky tape that I've honestly used for almost every miniature I've painted over the past 8 months. It tends to dry out sometimes. All you gotta do is stick it in a plastic bag, put a couple drops of water in it, and it'll soften right back up. So what you wanna do is put a little sticky tack. I just use solo cups. You can see I've used this cup over and over again. I don't like to throw them away until I've gotten my use out of them. This is how I attach my minis. The tack is awesome because it releases really easy and then you can reuse it. You don't have to press too hard, it sticks pretty well. Now that we're ready to prime, let's talk about primer. A lot of people swear by Chaos Black from Games Workshop, which I did use, but I found that you don't receive as much paint in each can. So I went on Amazon and found that the Army Painter's base primer, the matte black, gives you the most bang for your buck. One thin coat gives you a smooth and even base and allows your colors to really pop. It works just as well as the Chaos Black, and it's way cheaper. So let's get outside and prime them up. Make sure you grab a pair of gloves. The last thing you want to do is get black paint all over your hands. It's also key to make sure you really shake your spray can for a good 2 minutes. Really make sure that that paint gets mixed up and you can apply an even, smooth coat. Now while those miniatures dry, I want to share with you something that really helped me in my miniature painting, giving me a lot of confidence. And that's looking through the old heavy metal Warhammer painting guide from the early 90s Games Workshop era. Now I originally went and tried to find this on eBay, but after a bit of searching online, I did come across a PDF version of this document that's of great quality, and it's perfect to print and stick in a binder like I have here. What's really cool about this book was it was done by one of the great painters, Mike McVeigh. He'll show you how to paint up Space Marines, Orcs, Eldar, some Tyranids, some Chaos, all kinds of stuff that you can then apply the same techniques to any other figures that you have in your collection. But most importantly, in the back of this binder, I've also included a copy of the HeroQuest Marvel Winter Special, and you'll also find inside this awesome document, along with a bunch of lore on the board game, you'll find how to paint up your miniatures as well. And it goes through a similar process that the Heavy Metal magazine does on how to prep your miniatures from basing them all the way to the finished result. And so what I've done today is I've actually prepped a bunch of the models and I've painted them up in each one of these stages so you can kind of see the process I go through to get them to the finished result, following these basic techniques from the early 90s. You can also find this PDF document online if you look hard enough. It might even be on the Yield In. It's definitely worth a read while you're sitting around between quests. Now let's talk about how we're going to keep our paints fresh. When I first started painting, I picked up a few of these really cheap plastic painting palettes, which worked fine at the time. But over the last couple months of painting, I realized that the paint inside these palettes tend to dry up really quick. So if you're batching 5 or 6 different minis at once and you have to take a break, even if you cover it with cellophane, it tends to dry up. So I invested in a wet palette, and it's been an absolute game changer for me. This clever little invention keeps your acrylics workable for hours or even days. It's a lifesaver for those longer painting sessions or when you just want to come back to the project later. I started with a plastic palette and eventually made the move over to a wet palette after I started to realize how much paint I was wasting. But underneath here you have your wet palette. What you see is from my painting session last night. And how this works is there's a sponge underneath here in this tray that you fill up with water in the tray, and then you stick this wax paper on top. And so as you apply your paints, the water from the sponge will seep through ever so slightly on that wax paper and help keep your paints moist, allowing you to paint days later and not have to continue to mix up the special colors that you came up with. I can pick up my session exactly where I left off a day or two later. You might have to mix up your paint a little bit. Sometimes it tends to get a little watery. Give it a quick stir and you'll be ready to go again. So let's talk about paints. When it comes to colors, I ended up landing on a set of Vallejo basic colors. They have great coverage and are easy to work with. It's easy to get overwhelmed at the amount of options you have for paints. I told myself I never wanted to be that person who has 12 shades of yellow. So once you get comfortable painting and understanding your basic color wheel, be brave. If a tutorial online that you're following uses a different paint brand than you, just look at what you have and do your best to mix that paint up. It'll make you a far better painter and it will save you a lot of money and space in your work area. If you want to take your miniatures from good to great with minimal effort, you need to discover the magic of washes. Your classic Nuln oil, Agrax Earthshade, Seraphim CPM, and this Dragonov Nightshade that's came in handy when I painted up some zombies or monsters. Now I will say I'm almost out of the Nuln oil and Agrax, and it is quite pricey, so I'm looking at getting some of the Vallejo washes instead. I do think you get a lot more for the price, and it appears to be pretty comparable. If you're having trouble getting a smooth finish, be sure to apply a thin layer and build up your colors. One important thing that I have learned is to utilize some paint thinner. This is crucial in allowing you to get those smooth paints. All it takes is one small drop in the color that you've mixed. It doesn't change the color shade at all. You now have the same color thinned out to be able to be applied on your miniature smoothly. It's an awesome secret weapon to have in your paint box. This will not only thin your paint for application, but also stretch your product for longevity. Another thing you're going to need is a water pot. Now initially, just used a solo plastic cup, filled it with water, and thought it was good. But eventually branched out and got myself an actual water pot. There is some grooves in the bottom that will help you remove the paint from your brush. You can also slide your brush in here to squeegee out some of that paint. And it's wider on the bottom and prevents it from tipping over. All right, now let's get back to our miniatures. I've prepped a handful of these Skaven at once, off camera, so that way I can work through my batch painting over the next couple of nights. Of course, you can't paint without your brushes. For beginners, this Golden Maple Miniature Paintbrush set offers a fantastic variety of sizes and shapes to tackle all sorts of detail. From broad strokes to tiny eyes, you'll have a brush for every task. These are the brushes I tend to go to more frequently. I was told from one of the videos that I watched that you really want to try to paint with the largest brush possible and still be neat. That way you won't be spending too much time whittling away at something that's too small. I use this one for the eyes. It's okay. I do find that it's not as great as it could be. And so someone recommended on Reddit utilizing a toothpick where you can easily just dot a little bit in your black paint. Make sure you wipe it off and just create your small little dots for the eyeballs. It did help in tackling the smallest eyes possible on the henchman. Here we have our primed Skaven. And one thing you're going to want to get is a handle to hold your miniatures. You can use the same sticky tack on the bottom of a shot glass and paint that way, but I have found that getting an official handle has been easier for longer painting sessions. It also can hold quite a variety of sizes. Just make sure that the miniature clicks into place, because I have had some of them shoot off before in the middle of painting. So let's go ahead and put on a dry brush. You're going to want to grab just a piece of paper towel to wipe off your paint so you don't have too much on your brush. And then I have a couple brushes I like to use for dry brushing. This one's just a really cheap brush that my kids had. I cut it short and made the bristles a little bit more taut. And so for smaller models, I like to use this guy. And then here you have the dry brush that you receive in your brush kit. It is a little softer and bigger. We'll use this one today. I'm using the dead white. Give your paints a good shake. A small drop will do, you don't want to waste paint. You're going to work that paint into the bristles. And then wipe most of it back off. And then you're going to ever so gently dry brush your model. Just trying to hit all of the top areas and leaving the recesses dark. Now I don't have speed paints. I think this technique does come in really handy when you utilize the speed paints. But I do find if you thin your paints enough and you do a couple thin coats, that this does give you a bit of difference in the highlighting. And that's really it. It gives it a really nice dusted effect. Now I'm going to hold off painting all four of these guys. I might save it for a paint video at the very end of my advanced HeroQuest painting journey. So for now, I'm just going to place some off to the side. Here's a demonstration of the step-by-step process that you'll go through in painting your miniatures. Starting over here, you have your miniature that you cut off the sprue and glued to the base of your choice. We then went and prepped the model by washing it, removing any mold lines, and spraying a thin coat of our black primer. Once that dried, we went ahead and added our dry brushing technique, really hitting all those raised areas and leaving the dark in the recessed areas. From there, we went ahead and applied our base coats. Now, both the Eavy Metal Warhammer painting guide as well as the HeroQuest Winter Special both recommend using 3 to 4 base colors, not to overdo it in this step. You don't want a model that's too busy, especially at the size that these Skaven are. You will lose a lot of the detail found in the simplicity of this design. And then we're going to move over to our washes. The difference between these two stages, the washes will go ahead and darken up those recessed areas. And as you can see, it does mute down the colors that we chose. So be careful in your base color selection. Make sure it's a color that you already know is going to be muted just a little bit in the wash stage. So don't choose something too dark right off the bat. That way you won't lose any detail. But the wash we used was Agrax on the brown. So the fur, the shield, and then we used Nuln oil on the cloak and the weapon. And the wash stage is an okay stage. You can end here if you want. They will be tabletop ready. They are a world of difference better than the plastic that you get from the box initially. But if you really want your minis to pop, it's best that you do focus on learning how to finish out your model. And so in this stage, you're going to go back through with your highlights, highlight over those raised areas. I added some pink on the tops of the ears, some fleshier kind of pink around the mouth. I went ahead and gave it a lot of small brush strokes of different light browns all over the top of the head to emphasize the teeth. And on this model, I found it was easy to use that small brush to do the eyes. I went ahead and added some accents of the silver metallic color on the shield, especially on those raised areas. And then I finished the base. I like to use the Vallejo Diorama FX. It's kind of like a gritty paste. It's wet, but it does dry fast, so don't leave the cap off this for very long. You can easily transfer this over to your wet palette, use a brush to apply it. And so what I like to do is if you apply it in these kind of textured motion like this, up and down, you can give it the appearance when it dries of like a grass. You can also then draw in, a stone look if you want them to look like stones. All right, you can do that. You can raise them up. So this, I feel like, is a really good product to finish off your bases. You could use like the flocking technique if that's what you want to do. That's very old school, but you could. You can also pick up some sand. This is just some bowl filler I found at home. And so I used this for another project and ended up really liking this effect of the sand. All you need is some PVA glue on the base, pour over some sand. Here's an example of all the different ways you can base with those two materials. This was the Diorama FX right here. In fact, actually all three of these were the Diorama FX. So you can see that I got kind of a stone effect here. I got another gravel effect here and a grass effect. And then this one right here is what I used the sand on. So PVA glue, pour over some sand, kind of compact it down with a brush full of glue, and then wiped off any excess. And then with all of these, I went back through with Agrax and just gave them a little wash to give some dimension to the bases. So to get this grass effect, I used the Diorama FX, painted it on with a little splotchiness, giving it some texture. painted it green, and then I actually took a small amount of yellow and dropped it in there and just dry brushed over the top to give it a lighter grass effect. And then I used Agrax to wash the bases. Also, when it comes to basing, I like to keep a box of just a bunch of bases I get when I order 3D printed miniatures. Here's some from Necromunda that I used for Space Crusade. I think some of these were from my Warhammer Quest build. I like to keep all these different sizes and shapes readily available. So when I get into a project, if I realize I need a different base or I need to repair a base, I have a lot to pick from. And you're also going to need some Gorilla Glue to glue your miniatures down with. I usually get the gel version. For some reason, I accidentally picked up the liquid one. I find the gel works better, it stays in place, and it doesn't run everywhere. But this is a must when it comes to miniature painting as well. You never know when you're going to break something, or if you need to remove something from a base and apply it on a different base. So it's nice to have that at your workstation. Now that we have this miniature done, and I'm happy with the final results of the highlighting and the shading, we're going to want to grab some matte varnish to really finish this guy off. You don't want to spend all that time painting your minis and have them all chipped years later. So what we're going to do, we use one of these solo cups. Smallest amount of product in there. You don't need much. A thin coat. You don't want to glob it on. You don't want it to be too shiny, too thick. A little goes a long way. Just work all of this in evenly. And I would do one coat is plenty. As you can see, there's still quite a bit on the brush and the model. So you just keep on working it in. And that's it. One down, 19 more to go. It helps for me to batch a few at a time, working with 3 to 4 miniatures. And as each one of those minis are drying, you're working on the next step. So you work on the first one, apply all of your colors, work your way all the way to the fourth, and then by the time you come back to the first to do your washes, it'll be ready to go. You can knock out more minis that way, and all of your colors will be consistent with those groups of miniatures. So there you have it. Your complete beginner's guide to the equipment you're going to need to get started miniature painting. All sourced from easily accessible Amazon products. This isn't just about buying stuff, it's about investing in a new, incredibly rewarding hobby. So don't be afraid to jump in, mix up those paints, experiment, and most importantly, have fun. I found that the last 8 months have really pushed me into new areas that I thought I could never get into. And it's so rewarding to put your miniatures on the tabletop and know that you painted them all by hand. I can't encourage you enough to branch out, pick up some paints, and get started. All the product links will be included in the description below so you can start your miniature painting journey today. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and let me know in the comments below what miniatures you're excited to paint first. Happy painting, and we'll see you in the next video. And as always, united the heroes stand, divided they fall. Come, let the quest begin.